Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us here. I'm Eric Pratt, manufacturer's rep for Nimbus, a company based out of South Korea, which makes wireless products for doing incredible long range wireless productions. And we know that there are a lot of wireless products on the market, and I wanted to walk you through what makes the Nimbus products unique. And to do that, I'm going to use their 6220, which is a wireless transmitter for HDMI and SDI, which can go up to 5,000 feet. So with that, let me just point out a couple of the features of the 6220. Of course, it's a wireless video system. It's capable of sending video up to 5,000 feet. It has a really unique feature in that it is capable of connecting not just video, but also Ethernet, serial data like RS-232 or 422. It has an intercom, and we can use that Ethernet and serial data to control cameras, like a broadcast camera that can take Ethernet shading, like the new EVA1. We could, for example, use a Scarhoy RCP to shade that EVA1, or we could use a Blackmagic RCP to shade an URSA, or any combination thereof. We could also use a Scarhoy PTZ controller to control a PTZ camera, like we were doing just this past weekend at a House of Worship event. It also has intercom, and to more accurately explain how those things work, I am going to bring you up a shot of the wireless units themselves, and I'm just going to grab an intercom here. So this is the 6220 transmitter and receiver. Here. And we have on this side, we have the Ethernet connectivity. We have RS-422. We have several dip switches. And these dip switches let us set the channel without logging into the web UI. So we can go in here and we can just flip through them. There's a little book which tells us what the different channel frequencies are. And there's a total of 64 possible combinations, which gives us a really wide range. And then we can also use a couple of different methods of bandwidth. So a lot of wireless is 40 megahertz in width, but this unit can actually do 20, 40, or 80. And why would you want to do one over the other? Well, 80 megahertz gives us better stability in noisy environments, and 20 megahertz means we take up less width on the wireless channels. So that's also a setting. System ID lets us flip over whether we are connecting directly to the other unit here, or whether we're connecting to something called the YME 1000 relay, which I'll get to in a second. So we also have the link activity. So this tells us how much connectivity we have, whether we've got a good signal or not. Power, whether we're connected to HDMI or SDI. And that's just one side. On the back, we have V-mount, so we can power it via V-mount. We can also power it via LEMO, and we also have a DTAP connector. Other side, we've got our normal connectors for HDMI and SDI, and this is where we have our intercom. And our intercom can be just a regular off-the-shelf headphone that we would usually use with a cell phone. So we can use this to talk to our cameraman, and we don't need any complex intercom setups. Whereas if we wanted to integrate this into something like a ClearCom system, we can just build ourselves a wiring harness. But if you just want to have simple connectivity, we can just use a regular pair of off-the-shelf with a regular 3.5 mil jack. So that makes it really easy. And so this is the receiver that gives us the ability to take the video out via SDI, HDMI. This is the end where the technical director could talk to the person. So this is the output side. The input unit is pretty close to the same. It has a lot of the same connections, SDI in, HDMI in, power for if you wanted to power it via a regular AC outlet, there's a wall wart that you can plug into this. Power switch, intercom, DTAP. Again, V-mount, but it's also important to note that it's also got a V-mount on the other side. And why is that the case? This will let you hook this up to a camera, up to its battery slot. So you're mounting it onto the camera, and then you can pass through by mounting the battery here. And then importantly, on this side is also power, what video signal you're using, link activity. Again, Wi-Fi channel, which has to match this guy over here. These have to have the same dip switches thrown. Encoding rate. This is important because the Nimbus units are capable of reaching such incredible lengths by varying the encoding rate. So in the lowest encoding rate, we're able to get this over 5,000 feet, where when people ask me what the range is on it, I usually say 3,000 feet because that's the range for the higher encoding rates. But technically, this unit is capable of going a mile directly without anything intervening. We also have RS422. Again, on this side, it's just general serial. There's a USB port on both of these, but that's more for upgrading. It's not for sending USB data. And then Ethernet, once again, that we're able to do all kinds of incredible things with. Shade cameras, run switchers. We can send NDI HX even if the bandwidth is right on it. So we could send 2 video signals over this, which is really kind of powerful. And we can do, all kinds of different things if we stop and think about. Ethernet is really quite flexible. We could send Dante, or we could control a switcher on the other side of a football field so that we can switch between 3 cameras and only send 1 signal back. There's a lot of things that you can do over Ethernet these days, and this makes it a really unique solution for live production because we can do all kinds of interesting things alongside our video signal. Intercom obviously is very handy to have in a wireless unit, but the Ethernet really makes it stand apart. But these aren't the only things that make the Nimbus unit unique. There's also something called a relay. And the relay is a $700 add-on. And it's basically just a box that sits between the 2 of them. And what does it do? It gives us extra range as one answer. So we can use this to extend the range by another 4,000 feet. And this takes a NPF style battery. And we can power this. We can just throw this on a pole, and it too has settings, what the channel is and how it's configured to work. And then the other thing that it lets us do is it lets us go around corners. And to give you a little bit of a diagram on how that might work, I'm going to cut back to me. So the diagram here, let me switch over to my diagram. So if you can think of this is 2 5200s, and in the middle is that YME 1200, but we're up to the 1000 is the newest, and that lets you go around corners. So all wireless is line of sight, which I'm going to get back to in a second. But this unit lets us go around corners because as long as the 2 units have line of sight on the relay, we can use it to go around a building, or we can use it to boost our signal, which is a very clever and powerful solution for doing live production. For example, if you're at a stadium and the cameraman wants to run down the tunnel to catch the players as they come out of the tunnel, they will clearly lose signal because there's no line of sight from the production booth down the tunnel. However, if you mount the YME 1000 at the entrance to the tunnel, as long as the receiver has line of sight on the relay, the repeater, then the receiver and transmitter both have line of sight on it, and the guy can run down the tunnel and still be doing live production, which is gives us a lot more functionality. And he can go quite a ways down that tunnel, even if it's a 4,000 foot long tunnel. It should work. Quick question on latency latency. These units, they vary in latency. You can actually see over my shoulder, the YME 5200 has a 30 millisecond latency. If you put a relay in, it's going to add another 30 milliseconds. Now, we often measure the latency of wireless units in milliseconds. There are 1,000 milliseconds in a second. If you're more familiar with the terminology of frames, there's in NTSC at least, there's 33 milliseconds in a frame. So this is about a frame directly, or it's 2 frames if you're going through a relay. So that's how the YME 1000 relay works. But we're not finished in terms of what the unit can do that makes it special. So the 6220 has an H.264 encoder in it. And what does that mean? Again, we have this Ethernet connectivity. And nowadays, people are moving more and more towards IP production workflows. Now, I personally am still a big fan of SDI. There's a lot more data bandwidth in SDI. There's, 3,000 megabits per second, which is why it's called 3G. So SDI is really, powerful. It's reliable. But a lot of people liking IP infrastructure, you can actually take an H.264 stream out of this and bring it into your production workflow that way. Or you can use it in different ways. You can use IP to bridge some kind of infrastructure and turn it into SDI at the other end for your production switcher. So there's a lot of power in that, but that's not all you can do with H.264. So the H.264 encoder can also be used to let people watch the stream. Now, typically, when people buy a wireless system, or not typically, occasionally when people buy a wireless system, they'll buy a number of receivers. Now, this unit is capable of doing that. You could buy 2 or 3 or 4 receivers so that everybody can see what the transmitter is seeing, as long as they're all tuned to the same frequency. But in this case, you don't actually need all of those receivers, because if those other people want to be able to watch that signal, they can use a laptop or a cell phone or a tablet to connect to that. So there's also an app that Nimbus offers that lets you connect directly to the receiver as an access point, instead of having to connect this to a wireless setup. So there's a lot of power and flexibility in the unit between its intercom, its relay, its H.264, its Ethernet, its serial connectivity, on top of the fact that it can send video up to 5,000 feet wirelessly. So it's got an incredible range of features that separate it from a traditional wireless system. And if you want to check out more information on the 6220, you can visit Nimbus's website, which is nimbus.kr. So I'm just going to bring that up here so you can see what their website contains. So they make more than just the 6220. They also make the 5200, 5150A. And I'm going to take you on a quick tour of the 5200. So the 5200 is a less expensive, slightly slimmed down version of the 6220. And it has some of the same features of the 6220, but it eliminates the intercom and Ethernet functionality and serial. And those are obviously some very important features, but for those of you for whom which that is not important, you can get a smaller SDI or HDMI unit, which again takes the NPF style batteries. So we can use this as a small form factor live production wireless transmitter. Again, the 5200A and 5150 go up to 5,000 feet. This unit here is actually the 5200. It's a slightly less expensive unit that goes 2,000 feet. But importantly, these units are still capable of using the relay functionality. So we can extend these units. We could get a 5200A to go up to 9,000 feet, which is close to 2 miles. I don't know what that is off the top of my head in meters, but it's a long ways. And they're fairly cost effective if you compare it to other other wireless units that go close to 10,000 feet, you're going to find that you're going to be paying a considerable sum for these, whereas a 5200A and YME 1000 combo, you're looking at slightly over $3,000 would get you quite an awful lot of range. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the different things that people think about wireless. So I've gone over the products a little bit, but there's some important things that people need to understand when thinking about wireless. So I've created a nifty little infographic which kind of helps explain the things about ranges. So a lot of times when manufacturers give range for a wireless, and I won't come right out and say it, but in general, the ranges given are optimistic. And to help you understand what why you would want a unit with a 5,000 foot range as opposed to something with, say, a 300 foot range, we can begin to discuss things like interference, obstacles, etc., where a stronger range mechanism will give you a much better functionality. So for that, I'm going to just migrate over to our infographic here. And this gives us, remember I said I was going to go back to our line of sight discussion, the 6220, 5150, and 5200 give lines of sight up to 5,000 feet. The 5200A is the 5,000. That's not on here. Now, if you look at some of these different things, if you look just below the transmitter here, you'll see air being clear line of sight. That gives 100% of the range as quoted. And then, if we have things like cars or bushes or people, we're going to see some interference. We're going to start to see degradation in the range involved. So I put here 75% decrease. And then there's also trees, columns, things that you might see as direct visible obstacles. As long as there's clear air between your transmitter and receiver, it is possible to get through them. But if there's other things that are going to impede the signal, they're going to slow it down. Now, signal interference is also something really important. Now, I'm going to show you something nifty here. So when we do a lot of trade shows, and at trade shows, the wireless tends to be, quite busy. So here, I'm just going to switch over to my shot here. So this is a wireless application that I use to figure out what, where's my, there it is. Nope. Here. So this is a wireless application that I use to determine what frequencies are currently being used. And this is called Wi-Fi Analyzer, and it's just a free app. So we can use this Wi-Fi Analyzer to figure out, who's around, what channels are occupied, etc. And that is really going to help with resolving noise. So what we can do is we can look at that application and figure out what are the quiet spots, especially at trade shows, sporting events. There's all kinds of wireless devices in use these days, and these are 5 gigahertz wireless units. So they send video using the same frequency that some Wi-Fi units use, and that's not to be confused with 5G, the new cell phone technology. That's actually a 28,000 hertz frequency. So it's a completely different frequency, but they just use the same name, 5G. So when we're referring to wireless and 5G, that's 5 gigahertz frequency range. And there's a lot of things that operate in that range. So you want to make sure that you're operating on a quiet frequency. And that goes back to another one of the flexible things about the Nimbus is that it's capable of operating on up to 64 different frequencies, and it's capable of operating at 20, 40, and 80 megahertz width. And that 80 megahertz width will help you withstand some noise locally. But having strong Wi-Fi noise will help decrease, well, it will cause a decrease in range. So going back to our infographic, the other thing that I find is very important to convey to people is that even glass will decrease range. So when you use line of sight, you might be looking through glass, but it is not actually clear air. So it's important to understand glass is actually made up with metal. So when you're if you put the receiver in a booth and there's glass that has a coating on it, which most glass these days is either made or doped with aluminum or other metals, the more sun resistant they are, the darker the glass, the more it's going to resist, because those are actually designed to reflect you know wavelengths. But in particular, the more metal a piece of glass has in it, the more it's going to decrease. So even line of sight isn't a perfect explanation as to what how you will get your best range. Sheetrock, wood, these things will also seriously decrease your range, but nothing does it worse than uh, metal, or so sheet metal, concrete with rebar. They will stop a signal flat, which goes back to our ability to use something like the YME 1000 to help us go around corners. So if we have something that is really truly an obstacle, we can use that. However, let's say that isn't even possible to go around a corner. So if you have something like you've got a person on one floor and a transmitter on one floor and a receiver on another floor, you have no possibility of line of sight. And that's another neat feature of the 6220 is that it's capable of latching onto your existing AP infrastructure to route video from the transmitter to the receiver. So in an application where you've got somebody who's moving between different floors of a building, and the floors are made out of concrete, then you can actually have that person, that transmitter is latched onto your local AP infrastructure, and as long as there's adequate bandwidth between the access point that the transmitter is latched onto and the access point that the receiver is latched onto, as long as that network infrastructure is ideal for this kind of application, then you actually don't need line of sight, which is, again, it's really powerful. It's a real powerful and flexible tool for live production. So that's I guess. Well, I guess the infographic I was given was wrong. I guess the repeater only gives 3 to 5 milliseconds, not 30 milliseconds. So thanks for pointing that out. So that's a few of the interesting points about how the Nimbus wireless products work. There's also the 5150A, which is an HDMI version that I don't have present. But if you have more questions, you can check out the nimbus.kr website, and you can also visit onesourcevideo.com for more information and pricing on the individual products as you can purchase them here in the US.